Well, joining me now is Einar Tangen, CGTN's political and current affairs commentator. A lot to cover in this speech, but one of the things that I thought was really interesting, early in the speech, she talked about China's GDP, which of course is on the rise, and per capita GDP, and those are important numbers, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, this middle income trap that has been, a big worry in China. How do you get above it? Now, China is approaching that 100 trillion yuan mark in terms of its internal economy, but it's also reaching this $10,000 per person mark, and this is very important. That puts it right and squarely at the high middle income. It wants to be in a few years at about 12,000, which would put it very, very in the lower bracket of the upper income. But you compare that to 45,000, 50,000 in the U.S., it's still very much lower.
Right. And middle income we're talking about, but of course one of the other things he talked about, and this has been a significant part of his speeches year in and year out, this continued effort to bring people out of poverty and growing this moderately prosperous society. And of course 2020 is a big target, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, what was interesting about the speech is he uses this water metaphor, this river metaphor. He talked about how rivers can, have twists and turns. They can flood, they can go up and down. But along the riverbanks, there is prosperity. And this is what I think he sees with China, that the government's role is to make sure that people are taken care of. Despite whatever turbulent times we're going through. He used that analogy twice during the speech, and it was a kind of good way of pulling things together in terms of where he hopes the aspirations to go. He's been very strong about saying that the future is always one bend or one horizon from which you cannot see beyond, and you have to kind of adjust. So I think he's really telling the people that it's been not as bad a year as he might have thought, despite the turbulence, but that there's hope for the future.
And as John Xu points out, these speeches oftentimes recap some of the major highlights of the last year. He talked about the pride the country felt as everyone celebrated the 70th anniversary of the PRC. And even though there were these bumps that you referred to along the way in 2019, he mentioned that China has friends in every corner of the world and also touted the Belt and Road Initiative, basically, once again, citing how globalization is the path forward.
Well, absolutely. I mean, he's 180 countries, plus China is building, that it has diplomatic relationships with. I think this is an oblique reference to Taiwan, which is dwindling. I think they only have 15, and they're very small countries. He really wants to give this sense that China is moving forward slowly but inexorably towards this kind of one China. And that's where the remarks with Hong Kong and also Macau, he really sees them as blips. He's trying to make sure that even though there have been troubles there, that there's no divorce from this. Hong Kong is part of China, and the mainland's hopes is that Hong Kong succeeds.
And of course, he didn't really reference the troubles on the trade front with the United States. Were you surprised at that?
Not really. I mean, he wanted an uplifting message, and also one that was a little bit sober in the sense that he singled out a number of people for their sacrifices and talked about how important that is. Not only that the government do its duty, but that there are those people within society itself who are pushing things forward. He used the Chinese women's national volleyball team. He singled out people from government, from the private sector, who are doing things in a very quiet way to make sure that the future is bright. Now, remember, the crisis in democracy that is happening right now is because people feel that they have to protect what they have. They're voting for their pocketbook, for their own interests. They're not able to see beyond that. And I think this is something that China is trying to avoid. They want an aspirational society, not one that's defensive and afraid to go forward.
Einar, have yourself a great 2020. Great visiting with you on this first day. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.